Hey there, welcome to episode 56 of the Gig Life podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. Welcome to the show. Glad you're here. Hope you're well. I'm doing good. There's the formalities. Now, if you listen to this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, I was wondering if you could do me a favour. Now, at the bottom of that app or whatever page that you're on the app, there's a ratings and reviews section where there's a whole bunch of stars, 5 stars, from 1 to 5 stars, and a little write a review section. Now, I was wondering if you could maybe click some of those stars, let me know, or not let me know, but let Apple know what you think about this podcast. And if you like to write something, yeah, sure, write a review. That'd be great. What it does is it makes us a little bit more visible in podcast world. Wouldn't say it moves us up charts or rankings or whatever, but just, yeah, I think the more sort of ratings and stars that you got, you kind of tend to pop up more in search engines and that kind of stuff. So if you don't, that's cool. I love you regardless, and I appreciate you being here. So anyway, on with the show. My guest today is New Zealand drummer and educator Lance Phillip. Lance started his formal drum education at the age of 7 with Ken Oxford and then with Bud Jones, and he later studied with the great Rodger Sellers and Frank Gibson Jr. He's played in the New Zealand National Youth Orchestra. He subbed in for the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. He plays in the Rodger Fox Band. He studied at the Grove School of Music in LA. He spent 5 years in the house band for the New Zealand version of Dancing with the Stars. He's played in musicals such as Les Mis, Grease, 42nd Street, Mamma Mia and Evita, and has been a music teacher at the combined Wellington Polytech, Massey Uni, New Zealand School of Music and Victoria Universities since 1993. Lance has gone on to teach some incredible New Zealand drummers, including Darren Mathiassen of Shapeshifter, Julian Dyne of Ladi6, Mac of Lorde, Matt Beachen of Draxx Project, and Jonny Wilson of Goodtime Music, and that's just to name a few. I met Lance in 1992. He used to come to my school in Masterton, New Zealand, and teach me once a week. He was my first actual drum set teacher, as I'd previously been taught by the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra percussionist Norman Gadd, who never ever let me leave the snare drum. It was rudiments all day. So it was a real trip for me to be hanging out with Lance again and hearing what he's been up to, and also talk about my memories of his lessons and that time for me, and what I've taken away from his teachings and in which I still use today. So a true New Zealand drumming legend. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Lance Phillip. Cheers. All right, I think we're rolling. Lance Phillip, welcome to the Gig Life podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Stevie. Awesome to be here.
Yeah, man. So listeners, Lance Phillip is a drummer and drum educator from New Zealand. Now, when I was at college in Masterton, New Zealand, Lance used to come over the hill from Wellington or back from Hastings or wherever you were on your commute. Once a week,
driving Hastings, yeah.
Commuting back and calling to the school, and he'd give me a drum lesson once a week, and they were really formative years for me. And yeah, I'll never forget those experiences and the stuff that you taught me. And I think as we sort of go on today, I'll probably expand a little bit more specifically on the stuff once we get to that part. But it's bloody great to talk to you, man. Like, when I saw your name, when I saw your name sort of pop up on a Facebook thing, I'm like, oh man, because I years and years ago I remember trying to find you on Facebook or something like that, and I couldn't find you, and then I interviewed Darren Mathiassen in Sydney when Shapeshifters were here last year, and we were sitting down and we were talking, and he was telling me about his education, and he said he was under the tutelage of Lance Phillip, and I went, oh, what, really? I said, same with me, he was my teacher too, so we kind of chatted a little bit about that, and then of course since then I've spoken to Kerry Buchanan a couple of times, and he's also mentioned you, so it's really cool to be sitting here talking to you now, man. It's a real trip, real spin out for me. It's really cool.
Yeah. Me too. That's great.
All right, man. So you're on a bit of a break from teaching at the moment. That's how we kind of found some time to do this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a mid-semester break at Victoria University, New Zealand School of Music, where I'm full-time there and the program director of the jazz program. Mm-hmm. So, we've just been doing auditions and meetings and all that sort of stuff at the moment. Yep. So it's good to have a little bit of a break from the daily teaching there. So, yeah. Are you
gigging currently?
Yeah, I'm still playing in lots of different bands, everything from sort of like corporate function type bands with Rodger Fox, also in a covers band called The Hustle that plays everywhere from cosy clubs to, corporate functions and weddings and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, anything. I played in a Brazilian big band on last Thursday. I still play a lot at church, and so I'm busy all over the place, doing all kinds of different styles of gigs and things like that. So, I think it's important to keep the whole playing thing going.
Yeah,
so,
that's great. Yeah, and obviously it's all styles. It's not just jazz. Because are you specifically teaching jazz at the uni?
Yeah, it is jazz focus, but alongside the jazz, I'm always teaching the history of jazz, of drumming, early R&B drumming. We look at all, as well as sort of Afro-Cuban and Brazilian music. So it's sort of got jazz in the middle, but we've got all the other music along the other sides of it. Yep. Pretty much, you're not going to make a living totally from playing jazz. So I think it's sort of our responsibility to keep everybody up to something that they need to learn how to do as well. So we do a lot of percussion as well, so a lot of hand percussion. Mm-hmm. I've definitely had a lot of gigs where I play percussion instead of drum set, and that would have been, one of my earliest experiences was with Kerry Buchanan, where he was the drummer and I was the percussionist. Yep. And same with 5 years of Dancing with the Stars. It was Leighton Greening playing drums and playing percussion for that on TV. So I've done quite a few percussion gigs, and I can see how that's sort of a really great skill for everybody to learn if you're not the drummer, which often comes up,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right, let's roll back to early days when it all first began.
Yeah.
Musical family?
Yeah, definitely musical family. My mother's a violin teacher and her father was a trumpet teacher, so I'm a third generation music teacher, and my dad also played the trombone, not professionally, but so there's definitely music there. And so my parents were really supportive of me pursuing music. And pretty much that was the thing that I was best at, that I thought I could make a living from. So my parents and the teachers that I've had, like Bud Jones, really made me feel like I could do it, that I could have a good crack at, becoming a professional musician. So without their kind of like support, I probably would have given in and done something else, but I don't know what,
Yeah, right. Can you tell me a little bit about Bud Jones? Because I saw his name in your bio, and I tried to have a bit of a look around on Google for him today.
Yeah. Well, Bud Jones was probably one of my earliest inspirations, really. My parents used to take me to the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra concerts quite regularly, and so Bud Jones, he's from the US, and he kind of joined the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra way back in the late 60s. I think it might have been like 1967, 68. And so he was, around that era, he was probably one of the best drummers in New Zealand, just because he had like a really great American university education and experience and all that sort of thing. So I sort of looked up to him. He was one of the founding members of what was the New Zealand Jazz Orchestra as well, that did a couple of albums. And so he was kind of my role model, because he played in an orchestra, but he was also a jazz drummer. He could read, he could play a lot of percussion things. So he was really my main mentor through my teen years. And I studied for at least 6 years with him. And he's the main sort of person that I would say gave me the hope and inspiration that I could actually become, professional musician. But yeah, he's currently retired now, and unfortunately he suffered a terrible stroke, and he's kind of only got the use of one side of his body, but I still visit him as often as I can, and he's still, really into music and that sort of thing. So he would be kind of one of the main sort of people that I looked up to in my formative years. And I didn't actually start having lessons with him until I was about 13 or 14. So prior to that, I was having lessons with a guy called Ken Oxford, who's now lives in Christchurch, and he was sort of more of a brass band, pipe band, military style sort of drummer. So that was kind of my early year, inspired by the snare drum. I think firstly from hearing pipe, my Scottish DNA kind of resonated with hearing those Scottish pipe band drums, and then I gravitated towards anything that had snare drum in it. So it was like marching, anything to do with marching and that. So I really got into the snare drum, still love the snare drum, and won a few snare competitions, that had to do with the brass band and that sort of thing. So and also seeing orchestral kind of snare drumming. So that was a big part of my early development, which is not such a popular thing these days with people who want to start out learning the drums.
Right.
But it is something that everybody really needs to kind of like have some sort of mastery over, I think, So, yeah.
See, my first teacher was Norman Gadd.
Right, Norman,
you probably know Norman.
Yeah.
Yep.
He was a colleague with, he was a colleague with Bud Jones and that sort of thing. Yeah,
he was a taskmaster, man. See, my dad used to take me over the hill from Masterton up to Johnsonville once a week, and I studied with him for a year. And I never got to sit at his drum kit. I used to have to walk in with my sticks and my my music and my exercises, and just he'd be sitting down at his chair right in front of me with the snare drum, and I'd just have to play, and that was it. That was my lessons, And it wasn't until I met you, when you actually, and because I kind of was expecting something similar, and I think the first lesson you were like,
right.
have a seat, man, have a play. I'm like, oh, are you sure? Am I allowed? But it was great. It was good. It was good to learn that rudimental stuff. Definitely.
Yeah, I still kind of do that, yeah.
Has it always been drums for you? Was there any other instrument that inspired you early on? Or you always gravitated to drums?
Yeah, it's always been drums. Yeah, I definitely didn't want to play the violin or the trombone. So yeah, but yeah, I've got photographs that my parents took of me, you know, from age 3, you know, beating on tin cans, and I think one of the first drums I got was an old World War II Army snare drum with rope tension kind of things, and it was kind of, well, you know. So yeah, it's always been drums. I think I thought about the saxophone at one point, but it was like that was totally unaffordable.
Yeah, right.
But you know, so I just hung with the drums, and but you know, I play a little bit of keyboard. A little bit of vibraphone, you know, tune percussion. But yeah, and I don't really sing, you know, and I don't feel confident about that. But I can, you know, not publicly, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, it's always been drums.
Yeah, who were the early drummer inspirations?
Yeah, well, I would say, you know, Bud Jones was definitely one of the earlier ones, but within New Zealand, and then I was, you know, obviously influenced by what recordings my parents had. So they, you know, they had recordings of the Dave Brubeck Quartet, you know, so Joe Morello was one of those guys. But my parents also bought a lot of local New Zealand recordings. And so some of the people that really influenced me early on would have been Frank Gibson Jr. And also Ross Burge, who was in Rodger Fox's band, and then later on went on to be with the Mutton Birds, and he's still playing. He was actually a big influence on me. And then Roger Sellers, who wound up my colleague at the university for many, many years. We were really good friends, and his playing and his wisdom, and that definitely touched and has moved a lot of different drummers. So those were some of the early influences. I used to listen to Steve Gadd a lot without really knowing who Steve Gadd was, you know.
Yeah.
My parents used to belong to a record club called the World Record Club or something. They'd get a catalogue and they'd pick all these albums, and then I'd sort of look at them, and it had albums. So, yeah, I used to listen to that quite a lot. And then, you know, I would get an album like the best of George Benson. It had like everyone from Jeff Beccaro to J.R. Robinson on there. And so I just started listening to those guys, but I never really knew how significant a lot of these players were until much later on.
Yep.
So I listened to a lot of different players, but I wasn't heavily into like a lot of the great jazz drummers of say like Philly Joe Jones or Max Roach or Art Blakey. My parents didn't have any of those recordings, you know, so I was pretty much sort of brought up on what they had, you know, which was Dave Brubeck or drummers like Shelley Mann, mostly West Coast kind of jazz drummers. And so, you know, I was pretty limited to what came across our black and white TV on Ready to Roll at 6 o'clock every Saturday, or, you know, what recordings my sister bought, like if it was an ABBA album or something like that. So it was pretty limited for me through the 70s, you know, when I grew up. But, yeah.
Right. So with that sort of variation in music, I guess you would have been not just sitting down and playing along to jazz records, so you would have been playing to, you know, ABBA records and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I sort of learnt to play the drum set initially by myself, and that's kind of some of the reasons why I'm actually left-handed, but I set my drum kit up right-handed,
Yep.
Right-footed, but I play open-handed, and that was just purely out of ignorance, because I saw everybody on TV and how they had their drum kit set up, and so the first drum kit that I got, which was a real hybrid of Beverley drums and Pearl bits and pieces and things like that. So I had no instruction on that, and I just sort of started tapping away with sisters at ABBA records and trying to play along to different jazz recordings, and even mimicking brushes. I guess I had a set of brushes. I had no idea what I was doing, but for some reason I thought it was cool, and I just kept on with it. And then eventually I started to get drum lessons on how to play the drum kit, and it was pretty much, I learned everything from Bud Jones, probably from when I was about 13 or 14. So before that, it was mostly snare drum, playing brass bands and orchestras, and tapping away, playing very basic kind of rock beats and things like that, and knew nothing,
Yep.
Until I got to Bud Jones. So
now, what did Bud Jones sort of say when you rocked up and sat down in his drum kit, but was playing your left hand on the hi-hat, but traditional grip with your right hand? Because I've never seen that before. You're the only guy I've ever seen that plays like that.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I was probably one of the only guys he'd seen as well.
Yeah.
He didn't say much about it, and he didn't sort of see it as a big issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
So he kind of went with it, and it's got its bonuses for playing time, but it gets a little bit kind of mixed up when you have to do drum fills,
Right. Right, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Because you'd be naturally left. Sorry, you'd be sort of naturally left-hand lead, but then your left hand's obviously way over to the left. Yeah. Because Simon Phillips plays open-handed. Yeah. And the reason he did that, I mean, he was a right-handed player, but the older, like he was kind of, he just wanted this drum kit to get bigger and bigger, and he got this 10-inch tom, and he wanted to set it up on his left, but it meant his hi-hat, he couldn't play his hi-hat because he had to drop his hats really low. So then he just decided to play open-handed and taught himself that way.
Yeah, I think he was highly influenced by Billy Cobham, who was probably one of the first well-recognised open-handed drummers. And so Simon's drum kit looked a lot like Billy Cobham. And then Lenny White was also an open-handed drummer, is an open-handed drummer. And then Will Kennedy from the Yellow Jackets is another guy that plays that way. So there's a few really good players. I guess who's the other guy that plays for the Dave Matthews Band?
Carter Beauford. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's a pretty monster player. He plays that way as well.
Yeah.
So there's a few people that play that way, and so I've kind of can play some stuff right-handed to demonstrate to my students.
Right.
But the way I kind of get around it is I put a floor tom on my left next to the hi. So I have floor toms on either side. And when Dave Weckl came along, and he was kind of doing that because of the Gary Chester kind of method, I thought, oh, that's cool. Well, I'll just do that, So I've tried to have the two floor tom thing, one on either side with a lot of my setups.
Right.
But otherwise, I've just learnt sticking-wise how to sort of play on a regular drum kit. So I just try and be adaptable to, whatever the setup is, because a lot of the times you're having to sit in on someone else's drum kit, if it's a big opening for people, and you can't sort of mess around too much,
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about as you're starting to get a little bit older. So you started getting lessons with Bud at about age 14. Yep. So what sort of band experiences were going on at that time?
Yeah, well, that time I was playing in, all the different youth orchestras: Wellington Youth Orchestra, National Youth Orchestra, Upper Hut Brass Band, symphonic bands, just anything that was going, and then anything that was going on at school. I went to Upper Hut College, and so that was quite a strong school at the time musically. So we had they had a sort of a smallish band, and that's kind of where I started to get my experiences of playing some jazz. I had different friends and people that would jam with me, and so it was still pretty limited. I got opportunities. There was like a Wellington secondary school's big band that Bud Jones sort of took a couple of times, so I was in that. And there was also, what else did we have? Oh, at the time, Bud Jones was teaching at what was the Wellington Polytech Conservatorium of Music, which is where I wound up going and wound up teaching at eventually. But they often would have a big band, and they would sort of share the drum seat around. So I got invited to come along and play along in that. I did audition for the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, when I was like 14, but was definitely not up to it at that point. And I think Kerry got in there when he was 15. Then we were both in the National Youth Jazz Orchestra in 1986.
Right.
And he was the drummer and I was the backup drummer or percussionist. And so that all those things during my high school years. I also got to play with, I don't know if you heard of Lance Sewer. He's a guitar player from New Zealand but lives in Melbourne, and he was on that Jesus Christ Superstar band that Ian Jones was in.
Right. Yep.
And all that sort of thing. But he was somebody that I jammed with a lot, and actually did some of my first jazz gigs with him. And another well-known New Zealand guitarist, Lee Jack, been around for a while, and so they gave me some of my first experiences of playing jazz. That sort of thing really gave me the confidence to think that, maybe I could do this,
Yep.
So that was kind of the high school period, just sort of trying to get my chops together and becoming more aware of what I needed to be able to do to become, a working drummer.
Right. Were you seeing yourself as potentially being a teacher at that stage?
I wasn't really. I mean, I'd always been teaching all through. Like, I used to have a couple of different friends from school would say, "Oh, can you teach me the drums?" And I go, "Oh, yeah." So I'd give them lessons in my bedroom for $5, and something like that. And I didn't really think much of it because my mother was always teaching violin in the living room, and thinking, I don't really want to be a teacher. I think I had more lofty dreams, and teaching wasn't really one of the main things. But I wound up doing a bit of that, especially when I left school and started going to Polytechnic, and I did a little bit of teaching on Saturday mornings at a high school and things like that. But I wasn't really aiming to become a music teacher at that stage. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah.
I guess sort of the older you're getting, you would have started to be more exposed to more of that sort of that American Steely Dan, Toto.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember the first Steely Dan album I heard was Gaucho. It was a friend at school because we were talking about who's your favourite drummer, and I said, Steve Gadd, and they went, I've got this album that's by Steely Dan. They went, it's got Steve Gadd. And I'm like, let me check it out. So, and that was my first Steely Dan album. But I think the other drummers that I started to become more aware of were through purchasing the Modern Drummer magazine. I think I got the first Modern Drummer magazine I got was the Steve Gadd issue in like 1983 or something like that.
Oh, right. Awesome.
And so when I was aware that there was a magazine that had all these articles on drummers, especially ones that I've never heard of from the States, I was kind of like, addicted to like, when's the next magazine coming out? I'm going to grab that. And,
just on that, I remember when you were teaching me, you'd come to the school, you had this massive stick bag. And you open the stick bag and you just sticks in your mallets, and then you had Modern Drummer magazines in there. And you used to quite often pull them out, like you'd pull the new one out because this is when this is when you could when they got mailed to you, or you went to the newsagent and got them, so sometimes you'd rock up to the lesson and pull, here's the latest magazine, and I'd be like, I haven't got mine yet because I haven't got the subscription. I've got to wait till it turns up at the shop in Masterton, cool.
I definitely I've got just about all the magazines, hard copies of them. So that was a pretty influential part of my development and connection to the drumming world was through the Modern Drummer magazine. So so through those magazines, when they started to feature different drummers like Jeff Porcaro, I was like, okay, I've heard of him, and it was like, he must be pretty important,
Yeah.
So the magazine sort of like was telling me, this guy's really important. You better find out about him, That's pretty much how I learned about Vinnie Colaiuta. He was on one of, I think, the same year as the Steve Gadd magazine, maybe a bit earlier. And then my sister got a Joni Mitchell album that had Vinnie on it, called Wild Things Run Fast. And it was like, and I just thought, what's this? What my sister's got, some folk singer, Joni Mitchell, and then I was looking at the credits and going, Vinnie Colaiuta, and then I was listening to it and was going, wow, this guy's amazing, So that was my the Modern Drummer magazine really influenced and informed me and sort of taught me about who I should be checking out, and then of course,
Yeah, on the Vinnie Colaiuta thing, I'd heard, because I'd seen him in the magazines as well, but never really heard him. But a friend of mine gave me Gino Vanelli Nightwalker to listen to.
Right. Yeah.
And right from that first song, it's like smack Vinnie Colaiuta. Wow, man. That was definitely a real light bulb moment. Sort of made me start thinking a different way about drums too. Yeah, pretty awesome. Yeah. No, he was. Once I found out about Vinnie, it was like, I better check this guy out. Yeah.
So and it was the same with Jeff Porcaro as well. I sort of had seen his name on a few different things, and I thought he was great. But it probably wasn't until different magazines and different friends were going, hey, have you checked out this Toto album? I was like, no, I haven't heard that one. So I was pretty naive about who I should be listening to. Bud Jones was really sort of into big band music, so he was kind of like, he had some pretty cool records too that I hadn't heard that had Steve Gadd on it, and he introduced me pretty much to Buddy Rich and the drummers of Count Basie, Woody Herman's band, and Maynard Ferguson, all these sort of big band charts and things. So he taught me how to read drum music and interpret it, and got me hip to all the sort of the big band kind of styles of music. And so that became a real focus, and probably more than sort of rock and pop things. And I'd sort of developed a bad attitude towards pop or rock drumming, and thinking at that very naive age that was sort of something that was low jazz drumming.
Right.
So I was pretty naive about that, and it wasn't until I finished I guess my second year at Polytech, and I got to join a rock covers band, and that was when I realised, wow, this stuff is actually as difficult as playing jazz, but just in a different way.
Yeah.
So for me that was kind of, when I was probably about 18 was when I started to think differently about all kinds of music and drumming and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Cool, man. Now, so when did you graduate?
Yeah, so I didn't do year 13 or the 7th form at school. I went straight from the 6th form into Polytech.
Yep.
And the 3 years there. My last year was 1988, and then then I spent a year full-time teaching around all the Wellington and Hutt Valley schools, trying to save desperately to leave New Zealand and go to the US. So I went to the Dick Grove School of Music. So that was when I graduated, and I was very naive. Thought that New Zealand didn't really have much left to offer me, because I was all just thinking about me, right, and what I was going to do. And so graduated in 88 and started to save to go to the US, and I was hoping to stay there as long as I could,
Right. That was the Grove.
Yeah, so it was at the time the Dick Grove School of Music was based in Van Nuys in Los Angeles. And again, I was sort of drawn to that through the advertising and the Modern Drummer magazine through the 80s. And they had these full-page ads, and they had, on the faculty or guest faculty was Jeff Porcaro and Alex Acuna and J.R. Robinson and all these people that I'd read about and knew that they were important people in the whole studio scene in Los Angeles. And not only that, they had percussion guys like Emil Richards and Dan Greco and all these people that were sort of involved in the studio music scene. So I was thinking that's what I wanted to pursue, is to become a studio musician. And because I'd had a lot of orchestral experience, I was thinking, I'll be able to just get into the studios and I'll do a little bit of percussion, I'll do a little bit of drum set. And so my sort of role models for that were like drummers like Harvey Mason, who was also a good percussionist and obviously a great drummer. Another drummer called Steve Schaefer, who nobody really hears much about, but he did a lot of TV work, that sort of thing. So I was thinking the Grove School of Music is where I would meet all the people that had all the connections into the studio, and they did, and I got to meet them all. I got to go to sessions and all that sort of thing, but it soon became a very strong reality that there was no way in, because it was pretty elitist, and you really had to be able to play reasonably well everything, if you wanted to get into the percussion kind of side of things, as well as the drum set. So that year 1990 is when I spent the year in Los Angeles, and that was a really pivotal point for me, and that just changed my whole life thinking and helped me really to decide to come back to New Zealand and share everything that I had picked up in the States. Because 1990, sure, there wasn't internet. Most of the stuff was about videos and books and things like that, and so I just thought, man, there's so much potential in New Zealand to spread all this sort of info that I picked up there, because I was really aware that there weren't too many people that knew the kinds of things that I was learning over there. So that was really pivotal, and I'd become a Christian during that time as well, and it was sort of, I really felt that God was leading me to come back to New Zealand. My parents were still in New Zealand, and I could just really see the potential of what I could give back, and I knew that was going to be way more satisfying for me than pursuing something that was more focused on myself, and that has really I've just seen so much fruit from that decision to come back and get fully into teaching. Yep. So 1990 was really a pivotal moment for me. It was, and I met Jeff Beccaro, I met J.R. Robinson.
So can you tell me the Jeff Beccaro story? Because early on, before we recorded the Jeff Beccaro Spotlight episode, I was hoping that we could have talked about this beforehand and maybe pre-recorded, but it didn't happen. So yeah, tell me the Jeff Beccaro story. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Grove School of Music, it was a 40-week course, so it was pretty full on. But I think they used to have every month. So yeah, every 4 weeks they'd have a guest drummer come in on a Saturday morning and do a drum clinic. So we saw heaps and heaps of different drummers, and one of them, was Jeff Beccaro that was coming. We were all like, Jeff Beccaro, we're going to finally get to meet him, and we were sort of like pre-warned, don't ask him to do a drum solo. I was like, and don't ask him to play Rosanna. So it was kind of like, okay. And it was like, he probably won't play much. He'll probably just want to talk. So the brief was bring recordings that Jeff has played on and ask him about them. Okay. Now, all I had with me was a little box of cassette tapes. Okay. And one of them was Giro, and which has a track Morning on it, and Black and Blue, I think, was the other track on there. And so I just couldn't think, what the heck can I ask Jeff Beccaro without making myself look like an idiot, And so I kind of avoided all the Toto stuff and thought, I've always... So in hindsight, I think it was such a dumb question, but I asked him, did he play one-handed or two-handed on Al Jarreau's, Black and Blue in this sort of chorus bit where there's an open hi-hat thing going on? Mm-hmm. So that was my one question, and for the life of me, I can't remember too much of what all the other stuff that other people asked him. Yep. It just seemed to go by really quick. But I got to shake his hand, and he just kind of chuckled when he says, "Oh yeah, I remember that track."
Yeah.
It's just one-handed on the hi-hat, and then he played like 4 measures of the groove and was like, just to kind of make sure that that's what he'd done. And that was, sit back down, But he, during that whole period, that was when they were recording the past to present tracks that were added to that CD. Yep. with the new singer, Jean-Michel, whatever his name was.
Byron, whatever it was, yeah.
Byron, yeah. And he brought a demo tape of it to this, to this clinic, and so he was playing us the tracks unmixed. It still sounded like the real deal, He had a cassette tape of the tracks that were going to go on the Past to Present album, and he didn't play the whole thing of each track, but he was saying real positive things about the singer, and this is going to be a new thing for Toto, and blah blah blah. And and then he was sort of saying, we've started rehearsals for our tour, for this Past to Present tour thing, and so, hey, look, if any of you guys want to come down and have a listen, and I was like, yes, I'd love to, and he said, I just talked to this other guy called Jeff Wallace, who was one of the teachers there. He says, yes, talk to him and he'll arrange you to come in. And I was going, let's go to Toto rehearsing. But, when I asked this guy, can we go down? Oh, no, I don't think we can manage that. So it was kind of, So, that was as close as I got to actually sort of seeing Jeff again after that
Yep.
period. I didn't have a car in LA. I only had enough money to survive, and I lived pretty close to the school, so I didn't really get to venture out and see, too much. But yeah, that was my Jeff Porcaro moment,
Awesome.
and I do remember that much, but I don't really remember too much more about what was going on, and we didn't get any recording out of it and that sort of thing. But it was kind of it really made me think. Now hold on, because at that point I was really thinking you have to be able to play like Vinnie Colaiuta in order to make it in Los Angeles, And so seeing Jeff play and talk about what he was doing made me realize, well, hold on, Jeff doesn't do drum solos. He doesn't do anything like Dave Weckl or Vinnie Colaiuta, and yet look at all the albums this guy's played on. So he must be doing something right, And that's when I sort of realized that there's kind of this unquantifiable kind of mystique thing that those guys have all got. That all the record producers and artists want, And so it totally turned my goals around about drumming, from wanting to be, someone who was very technically proficient like Dave Weckl or Vinnie Colaiuta to somebody who was more like J.R. Robinson and Jeff Porcaro. Because I met, J.R. there, saw him twice, and man, that guy can just lay it down like you wouldn't believe. Different from Jeff, but man, he was another one, just like turn my head around. It was J.R. Robinson. It's like, wow. And seeing him live is quite a different experience to how he comes across on a recording, because he really plays loud, I couldn't believe it, it was like, whoa. Yeah. So, so that was my Jeff moment, and that really was sort of an awakening of Jeff Porcaro, whereas before I'd sort of, knew he was great. I'd listened to all the Toto albums and that sort of thing, but my head was still in Dave Weckl and Steve Gadd kind of fusion type drumming, at that point. So, yeah.
So when you came back to New Zealand, did you have an idea how you were going to go about teaching, and did you, develop your own curriculum or?
Yeah, so Grove School of Music, the percussion curriculum was set up by Peter Donald, who, and he was another guy that was a jazz drummer predominantly, but he wound up being the drummer for Olivia Newton-John. That was his sort of big thing. So he was primarily a jazz drummer, but he was super organized, had the whole curriculum so well set up. It really inspired me, because I'd never seen or thought of anything like that in New Zealand. So I sort of took that idea and thought, right, I'm going to try and get my teaching really organized like they've got going. And so that's been sort of my goal ever since I've been back. And I knew I should write my own material, because I didn't really see books and things that were set out the way that I wanted to teach, So basically, I just started writing my own exercises and didn't use too many other people's books. And so by the time I started teaching, 1991, I came back to New Zealand, and I realized that all the teaching jobs that I had before I left, it was impossible to get them back, all right? Because with itinerant teaching in New Zealand, once you let go and they get somebody else in there, that's it, so, right. Until they decide to leave. Right. So there was nothing back in Wellington, but my sister at the time was living in Hastings. And she sort of said, well, why don't you come and stay with us for a little while, and then you can eventually move back to Wellington. So I did do that, and I started to get a whole bunch of teaching around Hastings and Havelock North. And then by the end of 1991, I got invited to start playing in a band called Bad Billy and the Blue Flames. And that was the band that Ian Jones was in.
Mm-hmm.
And so he left and went to England. The trumpet player, Vaughan Roberts, invited me to come and try out for the band. So I went down there and I started playing with those guys. So by 1992, which is when I met you, I didn't quite have enough teaching in Wellington, and I was trying to get the magic number of 22 and a half hours teaching through the education department, because that meant that you were supposedly full-time.
Right.
And it would mean after a year of teaching at 22 and a half hours, your pay would go up. So that was my motivation. I was like trying to do as much teaching I could to try and clock up the hours and get my hourly rate up. And so I was doing it 2 days in Hastings by 1992, and then I stopped in Masterton at Macquarie College there and did an hour or two there, I can't remember, and then went on to Upper Hutt. Mm. So I basically that was like the craziest year, but that's where I started to kind of write all these exercises and started to collect all of those play-along books. I think you've mentioned I showed you some Billy Joel album books.
That's right.
That was one of the earlier ones that was sort of pop tunes.
It was Liberty DeVito play along book, and two of the songs specifically that we did, because I had to do 2 songs as part of my school certificate. Plus, I also had to do a composition, which you helped me with, and I'll talk a bit about that as well. So the songs were I Go to Extremes.
Right,
and the other song was I Love You Just the Way You Are. 2 very contrasting songs, And up to that point, I'd read a bit, and you would also, improving my reading, because I'd also learnt to read with Norman. So my reading wasn't too bad, and rhythms and that kind of stuff was good. But what I didn't have an understanding of was the breakdowns of songs, like a breakdown of a song into parts. And up to that stage, I would just put a record on and just slam that record, play whatever dynamics. But it wasn't until you showed me those 2 songs where each song was broken down into sections, and the dynamics were written on the book, and this part builds, and then we changed to the ride, and we do this such and such, and that really opened my eyes to every song I ever played in every band up till now. Cool. So that was massive, and it's a simple sort of thing, but unless somebody shows you don't know. You don't really know. Yeah. The other thing that I had to do for my school certificate music was create a composition. Now, that was something that freaked me out, because, being a drummer, I'm like, how the hell am I going to compose something where, as a guitarist, can pick up a guitar and play a melody, or, play chords? I had no idea. And you showed me how you don't just have to hit, it's not just boom, clack, boom, boom, clack. Each instrument has different sounds and tones, and you can change the tones. And so I had this idea of, my composition was called The Storm. So basically what it was
I think I remember that.
And so basically what it was it started off as a lovely day, kids playing in the park, clouds start to come over, then it rains, then it's a storm, thunder, lightning, the clouds and stuff go away, the sun comes out, the kids come out and play again. So that was the that's the story. So then you taught me to notate it, and then basically what we did was, the sun's out, it's happy, the kids are skipping, so it was a lot of on the rims of the drums to make look like the kids were skipping, and then start sort of rolling the floor toms as the clouds come over, and sort of wind it up, and then it was like a 30-second solo of just going nuts. And that was how we. I think that's how we wrote it too. Was just like open notation, 30-second solo or whatever, and then that kind of died off.
Yeah.
And then I kind of reversed it, and ended up getting really, really high marks for that. Yeah, when I did the exam. So yeah, so that that experience.
I remember that now. Yeah.
So that experience, taught me that drums are not just playing beats and grooves, that you can actually compose from it, and it's all these different sounds.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
Good.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah. The other things you taught me, I think I was very very rigid in my playing, and you sort of taught me the technique of sort of, for example, instead of playing 16th notes all with my hand like this, which you can't, because people can't see because it's an audio podcast, but you taught me to kind of, you're going to do the one movement with your arm, but you're going to do an up and down with your hand,
Right.
I'd never seen that before.
Yeah.
Norman didn't teach me that. It was all either fingers or hands, Yeah, and just general technique and comfort and sitting comfortably and that kind of stuff. And I've taken that, right through till now. So yeah, man, awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, I'm sure I've taught a few people compositions that have kind of got those sort of elements of nature. Into it, but it's kind of a good way to get started, though, isn't it?
Totally,
thinking like that.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Because when it was presented to me, like you're going to have to compose something on your drums. I'm like, what? How am I going to do that? Like, how do you do that? There's no melody or anything, But yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, if people that have listened to the Jeff Porcaro Spotlight podcast that we did, my introduction to Jeff Porcaro was by Lance here. I rocked up to listen. I rocked up to the lesson one day, and you were sad. You were a bit down, and then you told me, "Have you heard of Jeff?" Because I think I asked you why you were sad, and you said, "Oh, have you heard of Jeff Porcaro?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of him." And he goes, "Well, anyway, he died today. I think you just found out that he died that day." And then I think for that lesson, we just talked about him, and I think you may have had one of your Modern Drummer magazines might have had something like a picture of him or something like that, and then you told me what sort of stuff he'd played on, and then from that moment, from that day, that started my sort of my I'm not going to say obsession, but my interest in him, and he's as you may know, become probably the biggest influence, for me as a drummer, from that moment,
Yeah, because I mean, I can't really remember too much about me telling you that, but I know that whole period, I had written out various drum charts from the Toto 7th One album, that were definitely playable, for intermediate students and that sort of thing. So I was really into Jeff at that point, and it was a real shock, like it was with anyone that had heard about him.
Yep.
And having met him only a couple of years ago, it was
of course,
wow, unbelievable, So that's incredible. I was like teaching a bunch of high school students at that point. A whole bunch of those little tunes from that album that had some easier type beats on there. And I think around that same time before that, Jeff had just released the video, and so that some of the stuff from that video was really influencing my thinking and playing as well,
Cool.
So that's incredible. I would have to say that too, from that point too, when he passed away, it piqued my interest even more, and I got really into Jeff Porcaro. Good friend of mine, Tony Gaeta, was another massive friend or fan of Jeff Porcaro, and he kind of really switched me onto some of the albums I didn't know much about, and so the Michael McDonald stuff, and so that was definitely a growth and inspirational period about Jeff, So
yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, man, awesome. Now, so it was only 1992 that you were teaching me at Makora. So from that point on, what did you end up doing after the end of 1992? Because you didn't come back. You didn't come back to teach through that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It was. I found I really struggled with. I still struggle with. I'm a bit of a workaholic, as people who know me would say. But so having to turn down work is not easy for me. But it wound up being that, and I wound up getting plenty of teaching in 1993.
Yep.
Was when I got offered to start working at Wellington Polytech. Okay,
Yep.
So up before that, a couple of years before that, Bud Jones had been one of the drum teachers there, and Roger Sellers was the other drum teacher. And then Bud left, and so they had asked me. Paul Dyan, who was the head of the jazz at the time, asked me if I would take over what Bud was doing, and so I had all these hours added to my teaching, and I started gigging with all kinds of people and things like that. And so 1993, was when I, the whole direction sort of changed. I stopped the whole commuting thing.
Yeah.
Started to get into teaching at a tertiary level.
Yeah. Awesome.
And so I've been at the jazz school since 1993.
Right.
Continuous employment from when it went from Polytech to Massey University through to Victoria University now. So, it's been quite a long stint, probably one of the longest employees of the jazz school.
That's great.
So I feel very, very privileged. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just back in 1992, you had a little jazz trio, and I remember this because you came and did a performance in Masterton, and what I distinctly remember is the bass player had a 6-string Yamaha bass, and I'd never seen one of them before. I'd seen them in magazines, but I'd never seen it before. But yeah. Do you remember that trio? I can't remember the name of it. I do remember. I do remember buying a CD on that day, and I do remember you telling me about how you recorded it, and I think it was one microphone over the drums, and I remember that. But when I ended up getting rid of hundreds of CDs before I moved from New Zealand over here, so that probably was one that didn't make the cut. I apologise.
Yeah, Look, I think that group was a group called C for Cats, but I could be wrong. Around that period, I was with sort of like a fusion group, and the bass player is this guy called Tim Robertson, and he lives in the UK now. And the guitarist is this guy called Caleb Pritchard. And he was really into John Schofield and Mike Stern at the time. And we were all kind of into that sort of fusion-y, rocky kind of music. So I think if there was a CD, it was either one, like you said, that was just done like made at home or something like that. And at the time, I think it wouldn't have even been a CD. It might have been a cassette.
Might have been a cassette tape, yeah.
Yeah, a cassette. I know that we did a radio program at Radio New Zealand. You could always go in there at Broadcasting House and record, original music or other people's, your own arrangement of other people's music. So that may have been the recording that you got
Right, okay.
I think we had a saxophone player as well, but I could be wrong, But yeah, that was called CFATS. That was one of our sort of fusion jazz type groups,
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, back onto your full-time employment. So, so you've been there since, in the different incarnations since 1993, and you've taught a fair bunch of people, and like we said sort of earlier on, you had Darren Mathiassen as
Darren was one of the earlier ones. Yep. But, there's been a lot of drummers that have gone on to do really, or in bands that are quite significant or that are sort of emerging today. I guess Matt Beachen with the Draxx project is one of the latest kind of students to kind of have some success. I don't know if you may not have even heard of the Draxx project in Australia, but they're sort of doing quite well. They've been opening for Christina Aguilera through Europe, and now they're living in LA. They're signed with Universal, and they've got a whole bunch of dates throughout September in the US, and they're about to re-release their album there. So, the drummer from that is Matt Beachen, and he's from Upper Hutt, and he did 3 years with me at New Zealand School of Music, where he basically, everybody in that group, except the guitarist, are all from the jazz course. So they all kind of did jazz, but at the same time they were working on their pop tunes and jamming together, and then they've gone that way, But heaps of other drummers too, like the guy Jimmy Mac, who is kind of the keyboard Ableton Live guy with the group, with Lorde.
Yep.
So he's actually pretty phenomenal drummer. Probably better than Ben Barker as the drummer with Lorde, but he wound up being the Ableton Live guy. So he had lessons with me for like 4 years. Just when he was at high school, coming in for private lessons. And some other guys, Maeli Manzanza is another guy that he's doing his own music and has played with Clive. What's his name? Yeah, he's played with a bunch of different guys from LA, and he's got his own recordings and things like that. Ruben Bradley has moved to Brisbane. He was around the same time as Darren Mathiassen, and he's really successful now, teaching Griffith University and doing gigs. And all kinds of guys like Chris O'Connor plays with the Phoenix Foundation and that. Julian Dyne, Ladi6, and I mean, I know they're all kind of like New Zealand type groups, but so nobody's sort of hugely international, but still.
Oh, but still
quite good to see these guys out there doing stuff. Darren Mathiassen will probably be one of the more successful drummers out of that whole bunch of guys there. But there's been a whole bunch of drummers, and a lot of them have obviously gone on to teaching. One of them, my most successful students for teaching, would be Jonny Wilson, who started up Goodtime Music Academy, which is pretty big here in Wellington. And so for me, that's a real success to have a student that has gone on to start up his own music school. And he actually taught Matt Beachen before Matt came to me. So,
cool.
so there's just been this real sort of cyclical thing. People I've taught have then taught people, and they wind up having lessons with me, and then they go on and do something really big. So, so that's, for me, it's the satisfaction is about, passing on what I know so that other people, can do what call do, So I get a lot of satisfaction from just being part of the puzzle, the machine that kind of like helps people reach their goals,
Yeah, so that's great, man.
Yeah, so I'm still dedicated to that, and there's still great people coming through. I've just done some auditions with some drummers that have come from Dunedin, Queenstown, Napier. They're all planning on coming to Wellington to study. So yeah, the cycle just continues to go on. It's been incredible, really.
So what are your thoughts on the way that you've had to change teaching, with sort of the things with YouTube coming on the scene and people being able to access this stuff like really quickly and how's that?
Yeah.
How have you had to change the way that you teach to kind of keep up with that? Does that make sense? That question makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I have a huge 70-inch TV screen in my teaching university.
Right.
We're always referring to different videos and YouTube clips. It is such a great learning tool. But here's the thing, is that a lot of the people that I see posting even instructional things on YouTube, you can tell they haven't done that many one-on-one lessons.
Yep.
And there's just a whole bunch of like intermediate steps and things that you can immediately help somebody with if it's a private individual lesson, So I haven't gotten into that just yet, with the whole sort of like trying to do video lessons or anything like that.
Yep.
So I still think that there's real value in individual lessons or small group lessons. And, I continue to teach little kids on a Saturday morning beginner drum lessons purely because I kind of learn so much from doing that myself about technical things and little steps, and I try out little methods of how I can get them to learn something. So the video thing is good. It's good for some people at certain levels. If you want to learn a specific kind of style of licks, or you want to learn a specific kind of beat, it's quite good. Somebody breaking it down, and there's some really great transcriptions. People will play a Steve Gadd solo, and down the bottom they've got all the notation for it. It's like, wow, that's great. And you can slow it down on YouTube. So I think that's a fantastic resource. But at the end of the day, the thing that they don't seem to teach on any of these videos is what to play and when to play it. Okay? And so you can learn millions of drum beats, but if you don't know when to play a specific thing, it doesn't really matter. You have to have somebody mentor that to you. You have to have somebody show you how that goes,
Well, this kind of comes back. This comes back to what I was saying before when you were teaching me out of that Liberty DeVito book. Here's a song. Now, if I was just to play along with it, I'd just play. There'd be no dynamics, or I don't know why that feel led into that, and why it's you need somebody to sit you down and tell you why you need to play that and why you should play that, and dynamics and stuff like that. So yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, it's sort of, I think of myself as a musical tour guide, because you could go through a city, just driving through it, and you would miss so much stuff. But if you have somebody go, hey, did you see that? And you know something about this, so that's where if you've got somebody who's really experienced and can kind of highlight certain things, I think I see much of that on videos. I see a lot of technical things on videos, which is really important and great, but I don't see too much explaining about what to play and when to play it and how to do certain things. There's definitely, I haven't seen too much on big drumming, but or really about when it comes to jazz drumming and accompanying people. and what to play and when not to play and things like that. So I think that's still some areas for growth in that. And if you've really got somebody that can sit down and say, hey, no, watch this, I'll show you, I'll play something, and then they go, you really need somebody to like take that situation and then demonstrate, a way of playing it, For me, it has been how I've kind of learnt things the best, is sitting behind a drummer, like someone like Kerry Buchanan. I learnt so much being the percussionist, sitting and him, watching him make all of his musical choices and how he interpreted things and that sort of stuff. Those moments are just invaluable. Like sitting behind Steve Gadd for a whole tour and watching what he was doing and hanging out with them. Same with Weckl and Greg Bissonette, all these cats that I've spent a good amount of time with. You don't get that from a video. So yeah.
What's the biggest challenge as a teacher?
I think still the biggest challenge for me is in trying to get people to practice, trying to get them to do what you tell them to do. Yep. Okay. I think I spend a lot of my time trying to convince people why they need to practice this thing that I'm showing them. Okay. That has got to be my biggest challenge, is try and show them something that it might be something to do with technique and rudiments and reading, or it might be a style that we're learning, that a lot of people go, why do we have to learn this? How does this fit in with what I'm wanting to do? So I spend a lot of time trying to contextualize why we're doing this thing. That's my biggest challenge, is to try and inspire people to practice some of these sort of rudimental type things or technical things that are not as much fun as actually playing music. So, yeah.
That old chestnut. Practice.
Yeah. Well, that's for me is the ongoing thing. Trying to inspire people to practice and to present it in a fun way and a relevant way to what's happening today. So I try and keep up with the latest thing coming out. I've got different apps on my phone and things that have got play along things, and trying to utilize technology as much as I can and that sort of thing. So but some things are just the good old fashioned practice pad and rudiments and things like that. But I've really learnt a lot from teaching these little kids on Saturday morning, little 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, trying to get them to sort of grasp some of the basics, and I try and find ways of doing that without straight away putting them on the drum kit, So I'm not quite master of Norman Gadd, but I try and sort of be firm, but and we have different goals and things like that, to aim for. So I think that's probably the psychology of it is probably the most challenging thing, Yeah,
that's awesome. What's the next 12 months got in store?
Yeah, well, I know pretty much up to January. I've got. I'm actually going to be going to the US hopefully with Rodger Fox's band.
Oh, cool!
And we've been invited to play at the Jazz Educators Convention in New Orleans, and so that's quite a prestigious thing where we're going to play all New Zealand big band compositions, and then we're going to go on to New York City and record compositions at the Bunker Studios there in New York. I'm sort of working with Rodger, started rehearsing with him again with his band and doing gig things. I've got a little tour that he's got coming up pretty soon throughout New Zealand with Alan Vizzuti, who's an amazing trumpet player, and Holly Hoffman, who's an amazing flute player. I think Bruce Foreman, who's a guitarist as well from Los Angeles, is going to be on that tour. So I'm definitely doing those things coming up. And then there's all the usual kind of Christmas type gigs that are coming up. And university has got all of our assessments and exams are going to be around that same period in October. So, yeah, things are starting to book up, all those sorts of gigs coming in. I don't really know much beyond January, the end of January, and the whole thing starts again for teaching at university starts in March. So
okay, right, gotcha.
Yeah, so February is preparation and all that sort of thing, getting ready for university, that sort of thing, which is quite huge. But yeah, I've got lots of things going on, all kinds of different little gigs and things coming up. Yeah,
that's great.
But the Rodger Fox thing would be the most major thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Lance Phillip, thanks so much for talking to me today. It's great to see you again and chat with you again and sort of relive some of those memories that I have, at Makora College and just to let you know the inspiration you were for me. Took me to another level, that's for sure. Can't thank you enough for that. So glad everything's going well for you, and hopefully now that we've sort of reconnected, we can keep in touch and keep chatting. And awesome. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, you're doing a great job, Stevie. It's I've been listening to the podcast that you've done so far, and it's great, man. Hear these people, and a lot of them I've met, some of them I haven't, but it's been really great. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, man, awesome. Yeah, glad somebody's listening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's good stuff, awesome. Man.
All right, Lance, thanks so much, man. I'll be in touch soon. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Stevie.
See you, mate. Catch you, Lance. See you, man. See ya.
Bye.